Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Mohammed Suhail Khan. In this particular session, I will be talking about how technology affects human resource management practices. Before going into the details, I thought it would be easier if I define HRM initially. So HRM is a subset of management. It has five main goals: to attract employees, to hire employees, to train employees, to motivate employees, and to retain employees. If we just carefully look at the particular framework, it has an emphasis on employees. So the theoretical understanding of that framework can be understood that employees are basically a source of competitive advantage. Now we talk about that how the technology is affecting HRM practices. To first understand the concept of that how technology is impacting HRM practices, we need to understand that HRM is basically operates, and will operate in a technological changing environment. So what does this mean? This basically means that somehow our businesses are global at the moment. Now let's talk about a little bit about the globalization. According to Thomas Friedman, globalization is not something that is really new. However, Thomas Friedman basically divided the globalization into three big eras. So he talks about the globalization 1.0, globalization 2.0, and globalization 3.0. The author specifically talks about that the globalization 1.0 is basically driven by the transportation. So initial years, for example, from around 14th century to 1800, that globalization era was driven by transportation. Similarly, globalization 2.0 is basically driven by communication, and global 3.0 is basically driven by technology. In terms of understanding the globalization 1.0, so what the countries were doing in that particular time period. So we have to have that understanding very initially that countries, now we are talking about that the organization is basically competitive. However, initially we were talking about that countries are basically competitive with each other. So for example, if there's some small set of resources, most of the countries basically have some kind of competition to gain those resources. So in the earlier years, for example, from 14th century to 18th century, countries were kind of trying to establish their place in the world in terms of either by communication or either by collaborating with other countries. However, the emphasis at that time was around national identification or around economic dominance. So for example, a country who had some kind of dominance in terms of economic dimension, that was considered as a big country, or that was considered as a powerful country. At that time, because of the transportation, basically the world was shrinking in from the very large to the medium in size. If you just talk about the globalization 2.0, at that time basically the uh, countries was competing on the basis of communication. So for example, companies were thinking about having their products being transferred to other countries. So at that time we have seen that lots of multinational companies emerged in some way. They were thinking about seeking labor and markets for for the goods and services. There was some industrial revolution at that time. So the whole expansion was around the lower cost or the increased speed of transportation. So at that time, the world was kind of shrinking from the medium size to size small kind of. However, at the very last, that Thomas Friedman uh, labeled that globalization era as globalization 3.0. At that time, basically, companies are kind of competing on the best product and best services at the lower cost. So at that time, there were two concepts that really emerged. Either your organization should have a cost differentiation strategy or the value creation strategy. So most of the organization were driven around those strategy. They were trying to making product by kind of cheap labor. They were depending on some kind of instant communication. The internet was there, so internet kind of changed the whole competitive nature of the competition. The internet basically shrunk the whole world in some way. And then people were talking about the economics of scale. People were talking about empowered individuals. People were talking about empowered employees. People were talking about quality circles. People were talking about strategies around the cost differentiation or value creation. People were talking about the diversities of ideas of people. So we have to really think in that way. The globalization 3.0 is basically driven through the technology by the consideration of all those components that I have just defined. Like I think so, I have already talked about all those components. That globalization 1.0 was about conquering collaboration, national identification, economic dominance. Most importantly, the 2.0 was driven, globalization 2.0 was driven via communication. And this is the time where industrial revolution takes place. This is the time where MNCs emerge. This is a time where the low cost production, low cost services basically emerged on the map of the world. This is the time basically where the strategies were making in terms of how one can compete or have a competitive edge on their competitors based on employees. Globalization 3.0 that I already talked about is all about the technological advancement in terms of doing business. So for example, we are talking about Facebook, we're talking about LinkedIn, we're talking about MS Teams, we're talking about Zoom. So this is the era that has started from earlier 2000 till now. So this is something that world has experienced in terms of expansion of their organizations. However, also expansion or kind of pushing their products or services to other countries via internet as well. So let's talk about how HRM operates in technological changing environment. It has been observed, it has been written in so many ways that technology has basically altered the way people work. So we are talking about video conferencing tools. So you do not have to be in the same room for meeting each other. So you can use technology in some way that you can have your group meetings as well. We can talk about lots of collaboration tools in that way. So for example, Google Doc is one of the tools that is just coming in my mind in terms of collaboration. In terms of project management, Asana is one of the tools that is coming in my mind that is basically used in terms of project management. There is no need to write things on paper. You can assign your task via technological tool so that your employees know what to do, when to do, and when is the due date for any particular task or the project itself. Technology has also changed the way information is created, stored, used, and shared. I think so. There's a lot that one can say about this thing. information is being created every time. Initially, basically, the employees or the ordinary people were kind of the consumer of information. However, because of those collaborative tool or because of those shared tool that is in the market right now, information is being created in each and every second. So we are talking about not the megabytes of data, but the terabytes of data that is being created every second. Also, there's a move from the agriculture to industrial revolution, and initially, like in globalization 1.0, most of the or the 2.0 as well, the emphasis was on agriculture. However, specifically in 3.0 globalization 3.0 era, the emphasis was from shifting from the industrialization to kind of a knowledge working environment. So we have to think all those aspects that basically changing the face of the technology, and at the same time the practices in the organization is being changed. So the human resource management practices needs to be changed as well. There are a couple of examples that how core HR practices has been changed because of the technology. For example, once we talked about recruitment, we know that there are lots of recruitment that are being done via online tools. One of the couple of online tools that I mentioned here would be the monster.com. For example, LinkedIn. Specifically after recruitment, there's a phase of employee selection. Then there was also tools that can be used for selection. LinkedIn is one of the tools. Also, LinkedIn can also provide the online references that basically employers can use in terms of analyzing the type of the work that his employees were doing. Also, the type of the work that those employees were engaged in, the experiences were there. So LinkedIn basically provides a lot more than just recruitment and selection. It basically provides each and everything that is basically important in terms of selecting or recruiting employees. Then training and development is one of the major phases of HRM practices. There are lots of video conferencing tools that are now being used in terms of training or developing employees. So initially we were talking about face-to-face training and development activities. Now there is video conferencing tools that are being used for training and development activities. One of the tools that we can use in terms of training our employees would be Zoom. It also can be MS Teams that we can use for employees to train and develop. Also, we have another example of like lynda.com. This is kind of a portal where several training and development activities has been stored in a way that that employees can use for their professional development. In terms of communication, as I mentioned initially, and as basically from globalization 2.0, it was so much clear that that communication is the key between all those activities. So communication is also one of the important aspect of any organization. So managers or the leaders needs to communicate with their employees or with their subordinates in terms of giving them suggestions or the performance management reviews, or in terms of telling them exactly that what needs to be done. So initially the most common way of communication was either via verbal communication or via email. However, now there are several other tools that managers or leaders can use to communicate with their subordinates. For example, MS Teams is one of the tools, or Zoom is one of the tools that can be used for video conferences or for collaborating, or in terms of collaboration in the project. Decentralized work sites. So this is kind of a whole new concept in terms, if we look at the technology and the impact of technology on organizational structures, or the impact of technology on how the work is being done. Decentralized work work site basically talks about the emphasis on the final product. It doesn't talks about that all the organization members needs to be at one place. However, it also talks about that the the work is basically now decentralized rather than centralized environment. It also talks about the controlling mechanism of managers or the leaders. So decentralized work sites remove basically some kind of traditional face time and the manager's control. Now the greater emphasis is on the final product. So for example, once the due date is set for any particular product, then it doesn't matter that from where you are working from on that particular project. If you are collaborating, if you are doing things in the right time, in the right way that is being told, this whole philosophy talks about that. So it gives an opportunity to employees to work on their own time, to work in their own time, to work on their own pace. It has removed the barrier of the controlling as well. Similarly, there is a new philosophy that is being emerged nowadays, and that is WFH, or work from home. So this is one of the philosophy in the management literatures that talks about flexibility, that talks about individual flexibility, that talks about employees flexibility in terms of working in their own time. It also talks about focusing on the nature of the job rather than the timing of the work. So that basically gives some kind of liberty to employees to work on their own time. So and this is somehow all of those things are just possible because of the technological involvement in organizational structures. Now we'll just talk about one of the most important role that is emerged because of the technology, and it's been called knowledge worker. So in terms of definition, knowledge workers are basically individuals whose jobs are designed around the acquisition and application of information. So in terms of organizational working, information is the key. If somehow you're working you're working on the jobs that are basically involved, or that has to do in terms of analyzing the information, or that has to do in terms of communicating the information, those kinds of work are basically called knowledge works, or those kind of workers are basically called knowledge workers. So knowledge work jobs are designed around the acquisition and application of information. So for example, the type of the work that are being called as a knowledge worker, or should be called as a knowledge worker, would be the accountants, the teachers, the lawyers, the engineers. It also talks about the people who are involved with the technology in some other ways as well. So for example, the people who are engaged in information analysis, the people who can basically analyze the data in some way. For example, computer programmers, for example, software designer, for example, system analyst. So these are kind of the jobs that are basically have emphasis on either acquisition of information, or application of information, or designing of information, or analysis of information. So those kinds of workers are mostly called knowledge worker. So the emphasis on technology basically is making organization more productive. helps them to create and maintain the competitive edge, and also at the same time provides them with with better and useful information. And somehow knowledge work jobs, or the workers are engaged, so to provide, to create, to design, to analyze useful information that is being used by the organization to gain or sustain their competitive advantage. I hope that this session provides you an opportunity to understand that how the technology is impacting HRM practices. Thank you.